Okay, this is show you know number 1. This is in the last section of our fraction unit. It's simply applying all of the skills you now have. You have now all acquired skills with how to multiply, divide fractions because of grade 8. Plus in the grade 7, Logan, you have adding and subtracting fractions. You all understand through the practice that we've been doing what BeDMAS is. So now we're going to put all of these things together and ask you to solve questions that involve all of the operations together. So the first question we're going to give you is going to be 7 multiplied by a half, take away 2 divided by 3/5. There's our first question. Now within that question there are 3 operations. We have, if I was to put a little red arrow here, we have a multiplication, we have a subtraction, and we have a division. So with 3 operations, we know we should do all of the division and multiplication in order they appear from left to right. So the first thing I got to do is 7 times a half. Now if you could do 7 times a half in your head, go ahead and get 3.5, right? Keep it as 7/2, whatever you want to do. But in the margin, if you want to think of it as being 7/1 multiplied by 1/2, it's okay to write that down. Multiply your numerators, you get 7. Multiply your denominators, you get 2. You can change that to 3.5 if you want, but what I advise you to do is when doing BeDMAS questions, because you usually have to work with improper fractions anyway, don't change this to 3.5. Keep your answer as an improper fraction as you're working through the BeDMAS. So that's going to be 7/2 take away 2/1 multiplied by the reciprocal of 3/5. So the reciprocal of 3/5, of course, is going to be 5/3. And when I multiply that out, because I'm now not dividing, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, I get 10/3. Okay? So the first step was simply to solve all of the division and multiplication in that expression. And I've simplified 2 of them, and now all I have is the subtraction. Now make sure the answer to this stays where it is, and the answer to this stays where it is, and the subtraction sign stays where it is. And now all we have to do is subtract these 2 fractions. So 7/2 take away 10/3 requires a common denominator. The first one we're going to use is 6. It's the lowest common denominator that both 2 and 3 have. And an equivalent fraction to 7/2 that has a denominator of 6, since I multiply 2 by 3, I will multiply 7 by 3 to get 21/6. And since I multiply this by 2 and this by 2, I'll get 20/6. And finally, 21/6. When you subtract fractions, you keep the denominator. Some people, because they get confused between multiplication and subtraction, subtract it, you get 0. But you subtract your numerators to end up with 1/6 as your answer. Okay, so what is 7 times a half minus 2 times divided by 3/5? The answer for that whole thing using BeDMAS is 1/6. It's not. Now if we look at, I'll press pause here. Okay, so this is next questions for any pickleheads in the audience. We'll go 3/2 divided by, in brackets, 1/2 plus 1/4, close brackets, divided by 3/4. Now the hardest part with these questions is just making sure you keep your work organized, okay? Don't start shuffling around the order of different numbers. Keep everything where it is, and just follow the simple steps of B, then E, then DM, then AS, the 4 steps of BeDMAS. So for this question, the first thing I'm going to do is my brackets. Before I do division, so I'm actually going to write down this here, and I'm going to write down this here to make sure I don't screw it around and mess it up. And I'm simply going to add together 1/2 and 1/4. Many of us, probably without doing any kind of procedure, know that 1/2 plus 1/4 is 3/4. But if you didn't, you can make it 2/4 plus 1/4. But any way you get it, you end up with 3/4 there. Okay? So when you simplify the brackets, you end up with 3/2 divided by 3/4 divided by 3/4. All right? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do our first division as we see it from left to right. I'm going to keep the first fraction. I'm going to change it to multiplication. And I'm going to use the reciprocal of the second fraction. Okay? So this whole thing right here will become when I multiply by the reciprocal. 3 over 2 multiplied by the reciprocal are 3/4. And because I am an intelligent man, I will cross reduce this. 3 over 3 will become 1 over 1. 4 over 2 will become 2 over 1. And when I multiply that all out, I'll end up with 2 over 1. Now, if you didn't, you got 12 over 6. No big deal. 12 over 6 could be 12 over 6 and ain't no thing. In fact, let's just do that. Let's pretend we didn't cross reduce. And let's just put 12 over 6. Who cares? It's the same number. Now I'm going to have 12/6 divided by 3/4, which means I'm going to change it to 12 over 6 multiplied by the reciprocal. Okay? And let's pretend you didn't cross reduce here, even though it makes me a little uneasy. You get 48 over 18, which you'd have to reduce the lowest terms, which would be 24 over 9, which is 8 over 3, which is 2 2/3. Okay, your answer would be 2 2/3. But if you cross reduced, right here, if you said, you know what, I am a smart person and I am going to cross reduce because I am not going to work this out. I'm going to go 12 over 3 is 4 over 1. Now 4 over 6, you might want to write 4 over 6 here and think about that visually. What's 4 over 6 in lowest terms? It would be 2/3 because both are divisible by 2. So I'm going to make this 2/3. And now when I multiply my numerators, I'm going to get 8. When I multiply my denominators, I'm going to get 3. And I'm going to get it the same answer of 2 2/3. Okay, in your third example, the last show you know, says 2 1/4 take away 1/2 multiplied by, in brackets, 3/4 take away 1/8. So what I'm going to get you to do right now is, if you're watching the video, press pause, try this out, see if you get the answer. And if you're doing it right now, I'm going to press pause and you guys try the answer. Okay, in YouTube space, this only took a second. But in the real world, I gave you 5 minutes to solve this question. Here's what it looks like. So this 2 1/4 is the first thing. I'm not even going to use it yet because I'm not going to do subtraction. But the first thing I'm going to do is just change it. I'm not going to bother keeping it mixed. If you see a mixed fraction, just write it improper. You know you're going to do it anyway. So I'm going to write down everything that was here. That just comes down. Okay. Now over here, I'm going to subtract using my common denominator. And 6/8 take away 1/8 is 5/8. So my next line of my BeDMAS is now just 9/4 take away 1/2 times 5/8. Now there are people in this room, for whatever reason, think that they should do 9/4 take away 1/2 first. But BeDMAS says you must do multiplication division before. So the first thing you're going to do is this, which means this can come down. That stays the first term of your expression is still 9/4. Take away the product of 9 1/5 and 2/8, which is 5/16. Just multiply your numerators and multiply your denominators. Now the difficult part for a lot of people is the fact that when you multiply, you don't use common denominators. You just multiply your denominators. And when you subtract, you do find common denominators. So the only thing you have to remind yourself is this, is that when you multiply or divide, you don't use common denominators. When you add and subtract, 16 is your common. 5/16 won't change, but the equivalent fraction to 9/4 with a denominator of 16 is 36/16. And now that you have it with your common denominator, keep your denominator, subtract your numerator. Your answer is 31/16. Which is 1 15/16.